Today's episode is brought to you by Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to patreon.com/JoshuaVelas and become a $2 backer today and get early access to the new episodes. I'll be leaving a link in the description down below, but for now, on to today's episode. You're listening to the Augmented Experience podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Joshua Velas. I'm a student, musician, and a gamer at heart. Join me as I sit down every week to talk about all the latest news in the technology, business, and video game world. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. My name is Joshua Velas. I am your host as usual, and obviously, welcome back to the show. Today is episode 113 of the show, and before we get started, we're going to do a bit of house cleaning because, well, yeah, we always do house cleaning, so, I'm going to try to go through it quickly. Sometimes I don't, but who cares? It's my show. I'm being serious. It's my show. Really, I can do whatever I want, so, But aside from that, obviously, I want to thank you guys for coming back and listening to today's episode. It really means a lot to me. You guys come back and listen to these episodes, share them, download them, whatever you want to do to them. And it really means a lot to me. You guys keep coming back and supporting me. It really means a lot. Obviously, to my Patreon backers, I want to thank you guys for continuing to support me. Obviously, the Patreon page, if you guys want to become a Patreon backer, right now, we're still working on some things to, up the ante for Patreon backers and make things a little bit more enticing. Obviously, right now, if you want to support the show, you can just spend $2 a month and you get early access to the new episodes of the show early. So, that's something that I have right now. And then in time, I'm going to figure out more benefits to give the Patreon backers to give back to what you guys have given me. So thank you guys for your patronage. It really means a lot to me. I also want to say thank you for being patient with me. I know this Wednesday's episode was a bit more heavy. It was very emotionally taxing because there was a lot of thoughts, there's a lot of emotions, and I have to be more objective. And granted, I already had a lot of thoughts, so if you guys haven't seen the episode, I'm going to leave something up there so you guys can see it. But if you guys did see it, then thank you guys, and it really means a lot to me. Or if you just listen to it, because obviously I know a lot of you guys like to either listen to these podcasts or watch them, because we're doing, since audio is audio and then video is video, so it doesn't really matter. But you get what I mean, is that you guys can choose whichever one you prefer. Aside from that, we're going into a little bit more of a lighthearted topic this Friday for this episode, and it is going to be interesting because you guys voted. I will say this: most people voted for the Evo episode. That's just objectively speaking. That is what happened. It was a landslide victory for the Evo episode, and this topic didn't get so much love, but I think both topics have importance in their own perspective, field, that they're important in their own ways. So today's episode, we're going to be talking about ARM-based Macs. And if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, I will be putting something up here as well that will take you guys to my videos that I've talked about in regards to WWDC and some other videos that will come in handy to provide more context for what we're going to be talking about today, because it is a doozy. There's a lot of things here that need to be delicately and handled and need to be understood properly. And this is something that, since, it's not even just something that I don't know, it's also because of my age, because I haven't been around so much. I'm only 20 years old, and there's obviously people that have been doing this for much, much, much longer than I have, and they have seen way more things than I could have ever imagined and know more details than I have. So I'm also going to be leaving a link in the description down below to Renee Ritchie's videos, where he provides more insights and more technical details than I even possibly could imagine to do. But I want to give my own perspective, because that's the nice thing, is since we're people, we all have our own unique perspectives. We all have, something to give. There's always something to put on the table and, provide. So that's why I want to do my discussion regarding the ARM-based MacBooks, because I have a lot of thoughts regarding them. So if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, at WWDC, Apple announced that they will be switching from Intel processors to Apple Silicon. So what does that mean? So the most recent example that I can really compare this to is when Apple switched from PowerPC to Intel in the original Switch when they announced it. And yeah, it took time. It was met with a lot of criticisms, but it made sense. And this is a process that Apple has already been through before, because when you did the transition from PowerPC to Intel, Steve Jobs even said it would take about 2 years to do. And the same thing happened at WWDC. They announced that it was going to take about 2 years to do this transition. But one thing that people need to understand as well, that even Rene Ritchie talks about this, is how, yes, it is ARM-based architecture that they're switching to. It's still not ARM processors. They specifically said it was Apple Silicon. It's the same thing when they talk about the switch from PowerPC to Intel. It's like, oh, they didn't say PowerPC to x86, which is the codec, which is the, the system that Windows operates, or not even just Windows, but you got to be like Intel operates in, or that this is what the modern programming language, or it's a codex that a lot of programs use, is x86. And that's why they didn't say ARM. They said Apple Silicon. They did the same thing with PowerPC to Intel. They didn't say PowerPC to x86. They said PowerPC to Intel. And when you think about it, the Apple A series processors are based on ARM architecture, but it's Apple's own spin on it, because Apple is Apple and they like to do a lot of crazy stuff. And we knew this change was coming for a while. It was rumored. A lot of people were interested to see how this would happen, especially because when you think about some of the old episodes that I've done, and I'm specifically referring to performance benchmarking that I did with Juan, that we talked about it, how it's interesting how now smartphones and tablets are able to do a lot of the work that laptops are able to do, but much more quickly and much more efficiently, because these processors in our smartphones and tablets are getting much better, and they are based on ARM architecture. And this is something that we talked about because, I did a video talking about the iPad Pro. I personally think the iPad Pro is the future of, portable computing, because the reason I say that is there's a lot of things that the iPad is doing right. And granted, yes, there's still some early things that need to be worked out, and that can be worked out over time, but we're starting to see that Apple is being more consistent and starting to be a little bit more firm about where they want the iPad to sit. Because yes, if you compare like the i5 MacBook Pros and the i5 MacBooks and you compare them to an iPad Pro, there are a lot of situations and a lot of tasks where the iPad is able to outperform the MacBooks and the MacBook Pros, that they're able to do a lot of the tasks. And if you think about it, the MacBook Pros, from an objective standpoint, are primarily made for video editing, photo editing on the go, and just power on the go, that it's able to do a lot of things. And yes, you can even do audio things. Like you can run audio sessions and do mixing and things like that on the go, because Logic is still there. And then all of these, Final Cut and then Photoshop and et cetera, et cetera. But the iPad is able to do a lot of those things as well. And it's able to do them much more efficiently as well. That's something that a lot of people are starting to understand, that yes, the iPad is able to do a lot of these things. People have edited videos on the iPad Pro. They've been able to mix audio like heck. Like you have people like Henny the Business winning Grammys with this damn thing. Like that should be a testament that if you know what you're doing and you're able to use it to the best of its ability, you're able to do a lot of crazy things that a lot of people think that isn't possible, but it really is. You just have to be willing to put the effort. That's actually kind of a funny thing, because that's kind of how the engineering mindset works, if you think about it. Because in engineering, there is no specific way of doing things. There is none. There's many ways to solve a problem. The problem is still the same. There's just many ways to solve it. There is no, this is the best way. Do I agree that there's efficient ways of doing things? Yes, I do. Like, that's just realistic. Like, we want to be efficient. Like, we do not want to waste time, waste resources. We want to be as efficient as possible, but there are many ways to solve a problem. That's how engineering is. It just comes down to what's more efficient. Let's keep that in mind, because it's going to come in handy later as we continue to talk about this. And when we look at Apple switching from Intel, it made sense. Intel was not able to keep up with the demand that Apple had. Like, Apple was wanting to push more features on the Macs, because they even said this in the press conference themselves, that because of Intel's inability to meet Apple's pace, they weren't able to include a lot of the features that Apple wanted, and it led to a lot of issues because like a big issue a lot of people had with the MacBooks was thermals. That was a big issue, and that's not really, yes, I would say that's also Apple's fault for the design of the thing, but you also have to keep in mind is they had a specific design in mind, and the processors they were using just couldn't effectively work in those bodies that they made. So that's why they had to go through and redesign it and make it better. And they had to work around Intel not being able to provide very power efficient chips that don't run super hot. And Apple, on the other hand, with the iPad Pro, is a way, way, way slimmer chassis. And it's able to do the same workload and not get hot and not make a lot of noise. You see what I'm saying is that Apple has been able to successfully put out these chips every single year. They've been able to produce an A series processor every single year, meet it on time, and it's a very capable chip that always seems to be like years ahead of the competition. And this isn't just me like just circle jerking Apple. This is just being objective and being honest. Yes, Apple's chipsets are the best that you can get. Qualcomm can't make something better. It's very difficult because Apple is just doing something that's, just Apple. Like, they're just doing something right that's able to make these chips so powerful yet so power efficient. Why do you think when we saw the jump with the A12 processors that the iPhone 11, 11 Pro, and 11 Pro Max, just because the processor was more efficient, we got some of the best battery life we've ever seen on an iPhone? Coincidence? I think not. I know some people are going to say, like, isn't that Incredibles reference? Yes, it is. But you get what I'm saying is that this isn't something that, it's a proven track record that they're able to deliver what they promise. There is no, maybe, or, I think we're not going to make it on time, so we're going to have to do this. No, it's always, there will be a new processor this year. There will be a new processor. Like, you got what I mean, is they have a set deadline that they always get the new processor. And this also, if you think about it, makes things easier for Apple too, because on the grand scheme of things, now they'll be able to control the entire process. Now they control the design of the computer, the design of the processors, what goes inside this damn thing, and how does it go together. Now they control, like, they basically control the entire chain, like, except like some things, but you get what I'm saying is like they have more control. And granted, I get why this freaks out a lot of people, and I will explain that as well, because this is something I noticed a lot of people doesn't really talk about. And what's going to be interesting is what Apple has promised in regards to this, because yes, is this going to be a smooth transition? No, this is not going to be a smooth transition, because we're talking about, switching from x86 to ARM64. And yes, like, as people have noted, Windows can run on ARM. It can. We've seen the Surface, I think it's the Surface Pro X, right? Yeah, Surface Pro X. Granted, is it the best machine? No, it's pretty bad. But that's what happens with this kind of transition is if you're not willing to go all in, there's going to be some issues. And Apple has already stated they're going all in. So, and they've already gotten some native apps working, because that's Apple. Like, they have their own native apps working. But there are some drawbacks that we need to be honest about, because when you think about it from a professional user, a pro user, this transition probably scares the piss out of them, because if you think about it, like from the switch, I think even Rene Ritchie said the same thing too, that the switch from PowerPC to Intel to completely kill off the PowerPCs took about 8 years. So 8 years. Do we think that's going to happen with ARM, or from Intel to ARM? Who knows? It could be less, because Apple is dead set that this year they are going to release their first ARM-based or Apple series processor, or A series processor Mac. They want to do it. Like, dev kit has already been made and developers already working on it. You have Microsoft and Adobe optimizing their apps to work on the new chipset. And this will cause issues. Like, do I think it will be much smoother than the transition from Power to Intel? No. It'll be interesting to see what happens, but there is going to be some drawbacks. And the Pro user is obviously one that's kind of, been thrown to the wayside, that a lot of Pro users feel burned by Apple recently, mainly because of, decisions to the right to repair that Apple's still being stingy upon. Granted, yes, I know they've given the Mac, like they've given Pro users the Mac Pro, but it's still super expensive, and on some levels it is overpriced, but it does do the job. And then you have other devices that are able to do the similar workload, but not so expensive, And that's something that a lot of people feel burned by. Like, one of my friends that's a Pro user that runs a studio, like, he told me, he's like, bro, I'll just be honest with you, I've just been so burned with Apple because I'm not able to control what goes on with my machine. Yes, I'm able to do my workflows on it perfectly fine, no issues, and software is much more optimized on a Mac than it is for a Windows machine, but when something goes wrong, I'm pretty much SOL. So that's why I built a Windows machine instead of buying a new Mac. And it is true. There's a lot of things that a Mac can't do. The Pro user in particular is kind of burned because of the right to repair, because they want to be able to get the most out of their system. And at the same time, software updates is kind of a pain in the butt, because software update could brick your whole software and end up screwing your whole workflow, and then boom, you're pretty much SOL. Like, that, it can happen. That's why Pro users are much more hesitant to jump on trends, unlike consumers like us. We are more eager to jump on these trains and be the sheep that go to the slaughter, basically. Like, we're the test dummies. And prime example, like, it's how we are with our smartphones, is that there's a trend where people like to upgrade phones every single year. They like to change phones like they change underwear. Granted, has that died down a little bit? Like, yes, I know some people say it's because of the pandemic, but it actually has been happening for a while now. That the trend that people are starting to hold their phones on longer, because they're realizing, hey, these phones are getting good to the point where, like, upgrading every year doesn't really make much sense. And yes, I'm being honest with you, when we talk about ARM-based Macs or A-series processor Macs, they really need to think of it. Okay, side note, they really need to think of a better name. Like, there needs to be a better name for these things, because calling them A-series Macs sounds like the stupidest thing. Like, it sounds so stupid. Like, they need to think of something quick, something catchy. They're not going to call it ARM, because that's not really what it is, but they really need to think of something better. Like, and they probably will. So, like, fingers crossed. But what I was going to say was, yes, in regards to the Pro users, I don't see the Pro users jumping on I don't see them realistically jumping on this instantaneously. I think they're going to be the smart buyer, and they're going to wait and see, because yes, their Intel Macs will still be supported for a couple years. Granted, we are only going based off what has happened before with, like, from Power PC to Intel, that it took about 8 years to completely kill off Power PC. Like, no support, nothing. Like, it took 8 years. We don't know how long Apple is going to do this with Intel to their own processors. We don't know how long. Like, it could be after the 2 years that the process is completely, finalized, that, hey, the switch is finally gone through, that we're now all on our own processors. Like, it could be another year, another, like, 3 years after that happens, maybe 5 years. Maybe we get the full 8 years, and that's cool, because by then Pro users will already be upgrading computers anyways, because the Pro user likes to sit on computers much longer than the average consumer, because that's why they always buy the best thing they can buy and then hold on to it for as long as they can. Because if it ain't broke, don't fix it, unless if it's, like, unable to do the job anymore, then that's a different story. But it's going to be interesting, because yes, Apple software is going to run perfectly fine. Like, it will only take a matter of, I think it's because of Xcode, it will only take a matter of days to get native, macOS apps running. Like, it will only take a couple days to get them up and running. And then third parties could take a matter of weeks. Like, obviously Microsoft and Adobe are currently working on getting the Microsoft suite and the Adobe Creative Suite running perfectly fine on the A-series processors, which Granted, yes, it's going to be interesting because these aren't going to be yes. Like, I will say this. Yes, they are the same processors inside of the iPads and the iPhones. I'm also like turning that way because I'm looking at my iPad so I can like, because, you know, I have an iPad Pro. But, well, yes, they are the same processors. It's not going to be the exact same because, granted, there's going to be better versions of these processors inside the Macs because the Macs are running a whole computer operating system. They're running these intensive programs that take a lot of RAM, that require a lot of power. And yes, some people are saying that now, since we're getting ARM-based Macs or A-series processor Macs, that now we're probably could get macOS running on an iPad. And granted, that would be pretty cool because then that could lead to things like Logic running on iPad, you know, Final Cut, which I know a lot of people really want Final Cut on the iPads. Like, that'd be pretty cool. Like, I would love to learn Final Cut. Like, that'd be the only way I'd ever touch it because I'll never buy a Mac. But do you get what I'm saying? Like, it's going to be interesting because, yes, they are going to be more powerful versions of these computers. Like, the processor in the ARM-based or A-series processor Mac is definitely going to be better than the ones in the iPads and the iPhones. It will, because it's the same thing that happens with the iPhones to the iPads. Like, the iPads have the same processor. It's just a better version of that processor because it's a much bigger device and it needs more power, and you're able to do much more. And granted, Big Sur will definitely help in this transition because, you know, it's built to work with the new A-series processor Macs. But with the new processors, yes, native Apple apps that go on the iPhones and iPads can now run on the Macs with no issues because it's say it like this. It's easier for it to go from the iPhone and the iPad to the Mac than it is for the Mac to go to the iPhone and iPads. It's much easier to start with the iPhones, iPads to the Macs because since they're not so much power intensive and they're not really big, powerful apps, it's a quick and easy transition to have them on the Mac. And it is going to be interesting. But like I said, this isn't going to be something that's going to be painless. I do believe there's going to be a lot of bugs. I do think there's going to be a lot of issues. A lot of people are going to be mad. Like, pro users are probably going to be mad because they're like, you know, what the heck? Like, we don't agree with this. Like, this isn't proven hardware. And yes, granted, do I agree that it's not proven? No, because we have seen it that professionals have been able to use these processors to do very intensive professional workloads. Like I said, Henny has been able to win multiple Grammys and mixing and audio and everything on his iPad, and like he's done incredibly well. Like success, like professionally, he's done incredibly well. You have professional like software engineers using iPads to do a lot of their work because there's some native apps on iPads and iOS in general and macOS, or specifically iPadOS, that are able to do these workflows with no issue. And this is something, like I said, that it's going to be interesting to see what happens because we can only go by the roadmap that we have with PowerPC to Intel. But now that it's going from Intel, from x86 to ARM64, we're going to see what happens. And granted, do I think Apple's going to do a better job than Windows at this? To be honest, yes, because like I said, like we have the Surface Pro X. We have that device that shows that yes, ARM64 can run Windows. It's not going to do it perfectly though. There's a lot of bugs. Like you can't use 64-bit apps. You're stuck to 32, and most apps don't even have 32-bit versions anymore because it's out of date. The standard is 64 bits. And that's why Windows, like most Windows versions, are 64-bit. There's no reason to install a 32-bit version of Windows. There's no reason to, from my perspective. But it is going to be interesting. Like, as a consumer, yes, I'm excited because Apple has a point. Like, Intel just hasn't been performing up to par to what Apple wanted. Like, granted, people were saying that they could have just went with AMD, but even though, yeah, AMD is currently kicking Intel's butt, objectively speaking, Apple wasn't going to do it because they know they don't want to give up that good deal that they have with Intel where they can get like processors in large bulk and not spend so much with, unlike AMD, there is no First off, there's no proven track record. Like, yes, this is the first year, like the first year that AMD has completely destroyed Intel. If it happens for like 5 years, then I think Apple would be comfortable to start doing it. But like, if there's no proven track record, like consistent track record of this happening, then Apple's not going to jump the gun. And granted, they just decided, hey, we know we can get a new processor out every year. We know we can get what we want, and we can get the features we want, because a lot of things that a lot of people don't understand specifically is when the iPhone 10 came out and Apple started to do Face ID, they started to implement them in all their phones. That is what they had to do inside of the A series processor, was to enable them to do this kind of facial recognition. So this could lead to some new features, say like Face ID on a Mac, which I don't know why people would want that. I get why they would want it on a MacBook. It would make more sense, because when we talk about the Macs, we're not just talking about the Macs. We're talking about the MacBooks, you know, the iMacs, you know, etc. Like, we're talking about the whole Mac line. And this is going to be interesting, because some people want Face ID on a Mac or MacBook. I think that's on a MacBook. It makes sense because people like Windows Hello. So I guess, like, I don't really care if they put it on the real Macs, like the iMacs. I don't really care. I think that'd be a bit weird, but okay. Another thing that they could do is better, like, new display technologies like mini LED. That's a new technology Apple's currently working on that is probably going to show up in the new, not the new iPhones, but probably in the new iPads if they make them, that they're working on it, that they want to put mini LED, which is a technology that basically gives the same result as OLED, but doesn't have the same drawbacks that OLED has. And this could lead to Apple having better optimization using that new screen technology. It'd be pretty cool. It could lead to new ways and new features that weren't originally possible on Macs and MacBooks, because Intel was not meeting like Apple's like standards. They weren't meeting what they wanted, and because of that, they had to limit the design constraints. Because think about it, they even said this in the press conference. Like, they said, look, because of Intel, we weren't able to make the Mac that we wanted, but now that they control the whole, like, now that they're using their own processors, they can make the Mac that they want. Granted, am I a little bit concerned that means that the MacBooks are probably going to get even thinner? Yes, I'm a bit concerned, because I don't agree with making them thinner. Like, I think the 16-inch MacBook Pro is perfect. Like, keep that size, keep that. And then you can put your own processors that are very efficient. They're not super power hungry, and they don't generate a ton of heat, and keep it in that body with the fan system you guys already have. Mwah, chef's kiss. It would be perfect, because that thing's going to run cool as a cucumber. I think that would be a brilliant idea to do it that way. But sadly, they're probably going to see how thin they can get these suckers, which will kind of suck. So, you know, fingers crossed that, you know, that they at least think this a bit through, which they definitely have, because they wouldn't have done just this drastic change just out of nowhere. But one thing I did also want to touch up on, because a lot of people have talked about it and really asked about it, is how is this going to affect the pricing? Because one thing people really got mad about MacBooks and the Macs in general was that they got super expensive. And this really isn't Apple's fault. It's mainly because of Intel, because the processors that they're using are expensive. Like, it just happens. Like, the parts that they use are expensive, and it had to drive up prices. You know, prime example is like Qualcomm this year with the 865, because of the 5G modems, that you have to buy them, like you have to buy both, and it's super expensive. It ended up raising the prices of every smartphone this year that uses Qualcomm chipsets. So yeah, it raised the price. It made things outside of budget range. But granted, yes, some people were able to work around it and make great smartphones for a good price. Like, prime example, the OnePlus 8 Pro. Its maxed out model caps at $1,000. The base iPhone starts at $1,000. So, you know, I think OnePlus definitely did the best in that category, in my opinion. But it's going to be interesting because, like I said, is we've already seen examples of our smartphones and tablets. And when I say tablets, I'm mainly referring to like the iPads, that we've seen that they're able to do a lot of the workflows that a lot of people do on laptops, and they're able to do their workflows on devices that they carry with them everywhere they go. Like, and it's much more portable on a laptop. Like, you don't have to like, you get what I'm saying? It's like, you don't have to carry this big laptop with you. You can just carry your phone or carry your iPad, and you're able to do the similar workflows. Like edit videos, you can do that on an iPad. You can do it with LumaFusion. You want to record audio, there's Ferrite. There's like Anchor. There's other applications you can use. Like writing up documents, you can just get a nice keyboard case with your iPad and just type up emails and check whatever you have to check up on the internet. I don't know what you do. Obviously your smartphone too. Smartphones are able to do video editing as well, and you can pretty much like say you take a video on your phone, a 4K video, and you're just able to pump it into a video editor right then and there because your phone already, like the video is already on your phone, so you don't need to transfer it, and you can just start going, and then you can pump out content like that quick and easy. You get what I'm saying? Is that we've seen that these things are capable. We've seen that they're able to do the job. Do they do things perfectly? No. And we have to be honest, as PC users or anybody that uses a like Mac OS or Windows, whatever you use, like, yes, is there some criticisms that people have? Yes, because it doesn't do everything. But we also have to keep in mind is you're so trained to doing things one way, like you have to understand that things change and you have to adapt to it if you want to survive. Like being a content creator specifically, you have to learn to adapt. You have to not be stubborn in your own ways. Like you have to be willing to understand that change is good depending on the circumstances, but that in this sense, change is good. It's going to lead to some interesting dynamics. Yes, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be an absolute smooth transition, but it's going to push things forward and it's going to make things better overall. Like granted, yes, the Mac user is probably going to get a little bit upset because they're like, look, we're used to consistently having a functioning computer. And now that you're telling us, hey, that we're doing this big transition and we can't guarantee that it'll be consistent, at least for a little bit of time, that makes people worry. That's why like people have been asking, say Rene Ritchie, they've been asking him, hey, do you think it makes sense to buy a new Mac, right? Like an ARM-based Mac when they come out? And he says, wait as long as you can before you buy, because then you're able to get the best product you can, and and you'll be satisfied. You won't have to deal with buyer's remorse, which a lot of people tend to deal with sometimes when they buy something. But this is going to be interesting to see what happens because, like I said, this isn't Apple's first rodeo in regards to switching platforms. It isn't. But it doesn't mean that it's not a important leap going forward for Apple, because this is now them like relying on themselves, going with their own processor because they know how powerful their processor is. Granted, yes, the tradition, like say Mac users, they obviously always have another computer, like other than a Linux machine or a Windows machine. Like most people that have, say, a MacBook always have a gaming laptop or gaming PC, because if they want a game, they can only do that on Windows. And another thing I will also mention too, because, somebody mentioned it, that they didn't really mention anything about Boot Camp. They didn't really mention about how this transition to the A series processor is going to affect, running Windows on Mac OS. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think Apple is going to have to work really close with Windows to figure this out, to see how they're going to, like, granted, we've seen it run. We just need it to run as efficiently as it could. Granted, I always say running Windows on Mac is weird. Just buy a Windows PC, you lazy bums. Like, just buy a Windows PC. Like, you don't need, like, I personally wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do Boot Camp. Like, it's a pain in the butt to deal with. I know there's people that like doing it. There's people that are okay with that. I'm like, nah, chief, I'd rather just have a dedicated Windows machine if I'm going to do stuff on Windows. Like, it just makes my life easier. It does. Like, I'm sorry. Like, that's just my opinion. It just makes things easier. Like, that you got what I mean? Like that's just my perspective, but that's a whole different thing. But this is going to be interesting. I know I keep saying that, like, I know I keep saying this is interesting because it really is. Like, there's a lot of weight that goes into this, because this isn't just something small, like, you know, releasing a new iPhone for like $400, or, you know, introducing some new feature, or making some expensive keyboard case or $700 wheels. This isn't something small. This is a big change for Mac users, because who knows, maybe because of the new power with the new processors, maybe Macs could become viable gaming machines. Maybe, who knows? But that is something we have to be honest about, is that there's some people that just want the Mac or their Mac to do everything. They don't want to have to rely on a Windows machine to do other things. Like, you know, for engineers, they like, say audio engineers, they like using macOS because things like Pro Tools and things like, you know, Logic run really good on Apple computers. Like, they run really good on Macs and MacBooks. Like things like ProPresenter and things like that, they're specifically optimized for macOS. And for Windows, yes, they work good, but it just doesn't feel the same. Like, there, you can tell that there's some issues, and that's why you have companies like Pro Tools, like, or Avid, like the company that owns Pro Tools, they're working with Windows to optimize it even better for Windows. And that's why now more professionals feel more inclined to switch to a Windows-based machine, because they know that there's a lot, you can control everything that goes inside of it. You can, and get a really good computer for much less than what you can get a Mac for nowadays. And I do believe that with the new switch to the Apple series processors, that this is going to lead to cheaper Macs on the lower end, but I think the higher end Macs are going to stay the same, mainly because to balance out that price, they're just going to add new features, and it just makes sense, to be honest. Like, it makes sense. Like, but I think this is going to lead to new designs. This is going to lead to, say, better cross, like, compatibility between iOS, iPadOS, and macOS. This is going to lead to better compatibilities between them. Who knows? They could probably, like, allow you to run macOS on an iPad, or say you're able to run Final Cut and Logic on an iPad, which I think that'd be pretty cool. But I think this is probably going to end up leading to, like, iPads getting a bump in power too, especially if they want them to do that, because you have to keep in mind is these are computers running this processor, and it's going to be running better hardware than you could get on an iPad and an iPhone. So they're going to be running more RAM. They're going to be running bigger storage. Like, they're going to be doing a lot more things. Like, the processor are going to have more cores and more threads that you can get on an iPad and things like that. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do. And really, I would say what's going to show the promise of this is when we see the first ARM-based Mac, or really the first A-series processor Mac that will come out near the end of the year. When we see that and see it running, granted, I'm going to say this now, and I want you guys to understand, it's not going to be perfect when it comes out. It's going to have a ton of bugs. There's going to be a lot of issues, but I do believe that Apple is working hard with their other companies, say with Adobe and Windows and other companies, to get software up to date to where it's acceptable to push to market, because, you know, Apple is not just going to push something that's undercooked. Like, they realize that it would hurt their reputation to do that, and, you know, they've been burned by it. Like, prime example, the butterfly keyboards, you know, AirPower, they try to push it out, it didn't work, and then just canceled it. They're like, look, we know we promised this, but it just isn't to the standard that we want, so we're not doing it. And it'll be interesting for sure. But I do think the thing will work. I think it will work on a functional level. I just think there's still going to be some people that are, like, hesitant to pull the trigger because it needs more time. Because they even said to do the full transition will take about 2 years. They were honest. They're like, look, it will take about 2 years to do this full transition. In theory, you know, that's what I said, is like, in theory, if everything goes smoothly, no issues. But I do have confidence that Apple's going to be able to pull this off. And I think this is going to be a very bright future for Apple going forward. I think this is going to lead to more innovation, and it's going to push specifically Intel to strive for better, because now one of their biggest partners just said, you're done. Like, you're done. Like, I think this will push Intel to do better, because they already need to be doing that to begin with. Like, if you want to compete in GPUs with NVIDIA and AMD, you got to do better. If you want to compete in CPUs with now Apple and AMD, you got to do better. And I think this is going to lead to better competition, because now there's more players in the market. And who knows, Apple, to be honest, they still use AMD graphics cards. I wouldn't be surprised if they're able to do their own in-house solution and just dump AMD for graphics. I wouldn't be surprised. Or they just decide, hey, we don't want to deal with it. We know we can get great graphics cards from AMD, so we're just going to keep going with AMD, you know? But this will be interesting for sure. But I will say, I want to thank you guys for coming back and listening, for giving me your time, and for listening to these episodes. It really, really means a lot to me. You know, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, or if you're listening to this podcast, you know, you can hit me up on my social medias and let me know what you guys think. This is going to be interesting, guys. And I hope you guys feel the same way. If you're not, then that's fine. You know, like, you can leave a dislike on the video, then that's cool. Like, you know, it's what you guys leave a like or dislike. You know, if you haven't subscribed, you know, hit the subscribe button, you know, ring the notification bell so you guys can always be up to date when these episodes go live. If you're listening to on Spotify, you know, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to your podcast from, you know, you guys can obviously leave a review, you know, the usual. Let me know what you guys think about the show. But I will specifically say this, like, let me know what you guys think. Like, do you guys really care that Apple's switching to, you know, their own processors? Are you excited that they're going to do it? You know, what concerns do you have? Like, how does this make you feel in regards to this? Like, are you a pro user? Are you prosumer? Are you a consumer? You know, where do you stand on the spectrum of user base? You know, like, and hopefully we can have more discussions with, you know, people that have more insight on these topics, so that we can, you know, lead to much, I would say, more thorough and in-depth conversations, because I think it would be more enriching to have more perspective on something and not to be, you know, ignorant. Because I think that's something that my mentor always told me, was I don't view ignorance as a lack of truth, because that's always the definition that I use. Is I always say the ignorance is the lack of truth. The way my mentor always told me is I view it as a lack of perspective. It's not bad that you're ignorant, but it just means that you don't have the perspective to understand what is going on here. And that's something that I like to do, is to have more perspective on things, ask questions, you know, make observations, you know, pay attention to what's going on in front of me. And this is something that all of us have to be doing this. Like, we have to pay attention as tech enthusiasts, because this is something that will lead to the betterment of our gadgets. This is going to push things in a healthy direction. Granted, yes, is there going to be some birth pains? Absolutely, there will be. But that's part of the process. And we have to work through it and do it little by little, be patient and not jump the gun, but pay attention to what's going on. Provide constructive criticism where needed, and not just openly bash something just because it's new. Provide constructive criticism. You know, how can this be improved? Move forward. Like, you know, and keep pushing for, you know, healthier competition, because that's what that's how the consumer wins overall, is when there's more competition. And because when there's more competition, everybody is putting out the best product they can, and then it'll lead to the consumer winning because they are getting the best product for their money. But until next time, I love you guys to death. Please continue to be safe, continue to take care of everyone around you, you know, be respectful of everyone around you, you know, continue to be safe, you know, wear your mask. Like, please do it, guys. It's kind of a big deal right now. Obviously be respectful of everyone around you. You know, if you don't know if this person feels comfortable with you wearing it or not, just wear it. Like, do everything in respect to others, and be mindful, you know, like, don't be, you know, oblivious. Pay attention to what's going on, you know. But I love you guys to death. Please continue to be safe. I love you guys so, so much. Thank you guys for coming back and listening, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye, guys. Hey there. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day and listening to today's episode. If you're interested in supporting the show, whether it be financially, clicking the follow button, or just sharing the episode, it all works for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for your time, and I love you guys to death.